Welcome to our SitePoint webinar with Alex Walker. He is our design channel editor and will be speaking to us today about stock images. This webinar is sponsored by Graphic Stock, who are currently running a competition where you could win $5,000 for designing an 80s themed movie poster. So if you would like to be involved, definitely jump in. You have a chance of winning money. I would highly recommend it. But over to Alex now, who will start a presentation to help you get there and learn everything that you need to know about stock photography.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. It's called the Stock Imagery Survival Guide. And I'm just going to kick it up now. I'm going to start the presentation. Going back to the licensing of stock imagery, there are those four main areas: royalty-free, Creative Commons, rights managed, and extended enhanced licensing. And those rules are set out by the artist, and it's up to us to follow those rules to make sure that we don't get ourselves or our clients into problems and get hit for improper usage later down the line. Royalty-free is one of the major areas that we get a lot of our imagery, and this licensing is probably the most lenient and is used in both commercial and personal projects. It's free to use, but you can't claim ownership of the original work. Most of the royalty-free imagery out there that we find comes from two main areas: amateur photography and clip art, and public domain work and copyright that has lapsed on work. So there's a lot of archival and public domain, old books, that kind of stuff you find in royalty-free public domain area of imagery. Creative Commons is a relatively new invention in terms of licensing, and it has a lot of benefits, but it's also very strictly laid out. It's free to use, but you must follow the rules set out by the license of the original artist. Those rules include, nearly always, you must credit the creator. There's also some content that may be modified, but sometimes you may not have the permission to alter the original piece of work. Often, if you include someone's work in your newly created work, you aren't allowed. You have to continue that license of the original work in your work, so you can't change the licensing agreement from the original work. And also some licenses do allow for commercial use, but most don't. So even if you create the work with a view to not use it in a commercial sense, and that changes down the line, you can get into some trouble. Rights managed is the kind of work, obviously, like Graphic Stock and the various commercial places out there that license work and stock imagery to people like us designers. Rights managed is what you're dealing with in that situation, and that license gives you exclusive time-limited use of an image. These images can only be used for one particular project and for a set period of time, and quite often only in one specific geographical area. And then there's extended enhanced licensing, and this licensing extends from your original license, and that would allow you to use the original licensed piece of material on other things, like, you know, if you bought it for use on a t-shirt, it would allow you to use the same piece of art on a book or a cup or a website or whatever that happened to be. Let's move on to part two. Part two is, I found a really cool image, I just need to change it a bit right, is what I'm calling this section. And the short answer to that question is no, unless you're feeling particularly lucky. So let's look at two real-world cases, and they're both fairly famous cases, so you might have come across them before, but I think they're worth going through anyway. Case one is a case called Fairy versus Garcia. And this guy, he's fairly famous, and if you're a designer, you probably already are aware of Shepard Fairey. He's a street artist, and probably after Banksy, he's probably the most famous street artist on the planet. if you've seen his work, you would have seen probably this Obey sticker or hat or T-shirt. He does this big, bold, quite sort of almost Russian military-looking work. And even if you don't know street art, you probably would have seen this poster at times over the years. It's probably the most famous piece of work in the last 10 years, arguably. This guy is a guy called Manny Garcia, and he's a freelance photographer who works for the Associated Press most of the time. Back in 2006, he went to a press conference that was set up by George Clooney, and George Clooney was supporting Obama at the time, and Manny Garcia shot a series of photos, including this one. And if I lock off this little section here, you might start to get a slight sense of familiarity when you see it. If we put the two photos next to each other, you can see that there's not too much doubting that Shepard Fairey used that as the source of his piece of artwork, obviously making significant changes to that piece of art. Now, Shepard Fairey said when they went to court that his historical inspiration was the well-known JFK portrait, where he is posed in a three-quarters view, looking slightly upward and out into the distance. And this is the original piece of the original poster that inspired Shepard Fairey. Manny Garcia said, I've been on the campaign for 20-something months, so I would see the artwork, I would photograph it, and think, what is it with this image? But it didn't snap, it never occurred to me it was my image or my picture. The Associated Press nevertheless took Shepard Fairey to court on behalf of Manny Garcia, and the verdict was that Associated Press won, and Shepard Fairey eventually had to settle for 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and a fine of $25,000. So that little oversight, and obviously Shepard Fairey significantly changed that art. Nevertheless, he was hit pretty hard, and most of us would not like to see $25,000 fines laid across our head. The second case is Rogers versus Koons. This guy is Jeff Koons, and again, he's a pretty famous artist, a sculptor, and he calls himself an appropriation artist. And he's also the world record holder for the highest auction price paid for artwork of any kind by a living artist, and that amount is $58 million. And it's for this stainless steel orange balloon dog. But earlier than that, he made this sculpture. Back in 1988, he made a ceramic sculpture called String of Puppies. And it looked exactly like this, which is a photo that was taken, well, not exactly like this, but very close to this. It's a puppy photo that was taken back in 1985 by a guy called Art Rogers, and it was used on greeting cards and postcards and the like. And if we put them next to each other, you can see that it's not an exact pixel replica, but there's no doubt that Mr. Koons had seen this image and had used this image as the basis for his piece of artwork. Now, Jeff Koons argued at the time in court that it was fair use, that he'd created a new, more valuable piece of artwork by changing and adding to the original. And the court said that, they replied that it's not fair use if the average person would recognise that the image was a copy of the other. So Jeff Koons replied with his defence team that it was parody, that the artwork was poking fun at the banality of society. And the court responded by saying it wasn't parody, that parody would need to be poking fun directly at Art Rogers, and since it wasn't, it was poking fun at society in general, that it didn't qualify as parody. So once again, the verdict was that Art Rogers won, and Jeff Koons paid Rogers an undisclosed cash settlement. It was believed to be quite a large one, and on top of that, he was ordered to pay one of the String of Puppies sculptures to Art Rogers, which was valued at $400,000 at the time, and that was back in 1992. So if he still owns that sculpture, who knows what it could be worth. All up, Koons could have licensed that puppies image for $50, and basically the takeaway is that if you're in any doubt, just buy a license. Let's move on to part 3, 3 pro tips for finding the perfect image. I think this is a little bit more fun. Tip 1 is work on good copy first. Killer copy can make a fairly ordinary image great. And as an example of this, this is a Volkswagen print ad from 1960. And as you can see, it's a very stock standard image of a car. There's nothing particularly interesting about the composition or the layout or the lighting or the background or anything like that. But brilliant copywriting forces you to do a double take when you see it. And the copy is simply the word lemon, and nearly anyone would see that and need to read the rest to find out why they had that word underneath that piece of that particular image. And the supporting copy explains how a small blemish caused this car to fail Volkswagen's quality testing. And as this second example, here's exactly the same Volkswagen image, but just scaled down and put into a huge amount of white space. At the time, Time magazine, which is probably the largest magazine in the world, charged $6,000 for a full-page ad, and very few CEOs or art directors were brave enough at that stage to leave 80% of a $6,000 page blank. But Volkswagen had the guts to do that, and their ads were a huge part of Volkswagen's break into that US market in the late 50s, early 60s. So clever copywriting and layout makes an ordinary image great. Tip 2 is identify the cliches and then twist them and bend them and break them. Now, those cliches might include the subject matter that you're using, the camera angles, the typography, the color and the styling. Example 1 is, how does Levi Jeans stay young and hip? And keep in mind that Levi Jeans is about 120 years old as a company, so it's quite a task to keep a brand like that young and hip. The standard cliche is to show young, hip people in denim. But their twist was to find stock photographs of sheep and run with a stand out from the flock theme. And this is the ad that they've been using, or they've used relatively recently, with lots of these white sheep all heading in one direction and one black sheep heading against the flow. This is probably 10 or 20 minutes worth of Photoshop. It could be in a real photo, but I don't believe that they actually found a black sheep to sit in the middle of this flock and head in the other direction. So a really effective ad, sort of ad that would stick out in the middle of a fashion magazine or any other situation that you would normally find a Levi ad in. Example 2 is, how does Pedigree dog food promote the idea of dog adoption? And the cliche is to take the view of, please help us take care of all the sad puppies. But their twist is to start with this image on one side of the page, which is a very sad and forlorn and stressed looking guy. The black clouds above it are sort of bearing down on him, and it's a windswept beach, and you have to wonder what has gone wrong with this guy's life, what's the stress and hassle that this guy is dealing with. And on the other side of the page is this photo, and this is obviously the original that had a dog in it. And when we look at it, we can realize that the guy was actually just playing with his dog, and they just photoshopped out the dog from the first image, and they've run with the tagline, "A dog makes your life happier, adopt." So they've actually switched it around to be take care of yourself rather than take care of the dog, which is a pretty clever approach. And again, this is taking a stock image. Maybe they actually photographed this, but you could probably find a stock image that would work in this situation. And they've run with 10 minutes of Photoshop to get rid of the dog, and they've got a really effective ad and a great image. And example 3 is, how does the Worldwide Wildlife Fund protect the Arctic? And the cliche is to say, look, aren't polar bears cute? And let's face it, they are. Look at them there. But their twist is to take the polar bears and to Photoshop on this graffiti. And there's something just really nasty about this whole image. You know, the white of the bears in the background and that kind of thing makes it really difficult to kind of look at. Funny thing is with this image is the saddest looking bear is the one at the back, and he almost looks like he wants the tough tats that are been sprayed onto the other bears. Anyway, that's only my take on it. But yeah, their take is to deface the bears and break the white of the background, and another 10-minute Photoshop job to turn out a brilliant image. And tip 3 is embrace the weird, or at least a touch of the weird. And I'm going to just jump into a little story here about 2 gentlemen. And the first man is a guy called Elton Jett, who was the president of Hathaway Shirts back in the 1950s. Hathaway was about a 100-year-old company at that stage. It started out as a small company, and it was still a small company of about 15 people in the mid-50s. This guy is a guy called David Ogilvy, who is to this day a legend in the advertising industry. If you're not aware of him, you might be aware of this guy. This is Don Draper from the Mad Men series, and David Ogilvy is pretty much the original Don Draper. He was the kind of guy who, if you could get him to run with your account and do your advertising, he could make your company, you know, a success, basically just by how good he was. So Hathaway had a very small marketing budget. It was the kind of marketing budget that would normally be overlooked by Ogilvy, but Elton Jett was smart enough to approach Ogilvy and say he would give him 2 guarantees, saying that he would never change Ogilvy's copy and that he would remain an Ogilvy and Mather client for life. And that was enough to get Ogilvy on board. He agreed to take on the Hathaway account. So Ogilvy's idea was pretty stock standard in a lot of ways. He went for the sophisticated man of the world, almost like a James Bond figure, maybe an older James Bond, in a rich, luxurious setting. And he threw in one little twist. On the way to the photo shoot, he picked up a 50-cent eye patch. And about halfway through the photo shoot, he threw it to the model and asked the guy to put it on. Now, why an eye patch? Ogilvy's view was that the eye patch was there because it changed the photograph from a product shot into a story. And it's true that you can't help wondering, who is that guy? How did he lose his eye? Was he in the war? Is he a spy? What's going on with the eye patch? And how did he get to where he's going, and what's going on? And they ran with that eye patch idea for years to come, and it's quite comical to look at these days. Here he is with a cello, and this is the one I love, doing calculus or some kind of crazy mathematics on the background, on the blackboard behind, and having a Chianti and a sandwich, and here he is looking at a shotgun and composing music. And these ads ran for years. Here he is playing chess, and even when they changed models, they stuck with this whole crazy eye patch idea, and it became like a brand asset. Ridiculous, stagey, goofy, absolutely, particularly to our eyes now, but Hathaway became the #2 shirt company in the States, and Elton Jett stuck with his promise and stayed with Ogilvy and Mather until Jett retired in the 80s. One more example of embracing the weird. Scrabble are a really smart company, and their marketing team are very clever, and they have great imagery, and their tiles, and the wooden tiles, or the little plastic tiles I think they are now, are very iconic, and they're a great visual asset, and they were using those for years and still do sometimes in their ads. But recently they started to break away from that whole idea of using the game pieces, and here you can see just an incredible image if you come across it in a magazine. How they even start with a stock image of an elephant and start breaking it up into sections. These meaty parts in between the elephant, I'm not sure how you do that, but that's an incredible image. And they also do a lot of word puns that really must appeal to the people who play Scrabble. They're really clever little visual ideas, and this one obviously crow and bar put together, which is something that you would do in the game of Scrabble to extend a word to get points. And this one's particularly disturbing. There's something about those spiky bits on that kitten where we change cat into caterpillar and pen into penguin. Really clever stuff, and it's the sort of thing that if you come across it in a magazine, it's hard not to look at it and really wonder what you've come across. So Scrabble combines easy to source stock photos and cute word puns and some pretty slick Photoshop manipulations into a result that is a very memorable image. So recapping those 3 tips, work on great copy first before you start working on the imagery. Identify the cliches and break them, and embrace the weird, or at least a little bit. And that pretty much covers it for today. As I said, I'm Alex Walker from SitePoint. I'm the Design and UX Editor, and thanks again to SitePoint and to Graphic Stock and to our friends at 99 Designs for helping us out today. And thanks for reading, watching, and listening.
So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat. I will ping them across to Alex so he could answer them. Alex, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. I love the Scrabble dictionary combination there. So yeah, it was very insightful. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Where do you find inspiration when embracing the weird? Photo inspiration, that is.
I think the ad teams of the world. There's a site called I think it's called adsoftheworld.com that brings a lot of this stuff together. I think the smartest imagery people on the planet still work for magazines and for TV commercials. So that is one of the places that I go to, and also just the more you understand the cliches, I think the easier it is to take those cliches as a starting point and then jump as far as you can in the opposite direction. For example, the Levi guys, just looking through a magazine and seeing what the standard responses are in there to people pitching ads. It's beautiful people in beautiful areas, and to suddenly throw you know, the image of sheep in amongst that, it's very hard not to sort of do a double take when you see that sort of thing. So I think that's a pretty good place to start. But yeah, I think that's probably the way that I take. That's the approach that I take.
Excellent. So Cassandra has a question for you. What are some of the best resources for getting reasonably priced exclusive stock photography?
I think in many ways, one of the things that I know some people do is they actually put one day a month aside for actually going out and shooting their own stock. One of the best ways of getting reasonably priced stock photography is to simply build your own library. That doesn't happen very quickly, but before you know it, quite often, if you've been doing it for a few years, you'll all of a sudden have this, you know, you will have built up quite a large library of stock just by, you know, thinking, okay, I'm going to the market today, let's keep an eye open and sort of pick stuff up. So I know a couple of people that just set aside maybe the first of the month each month and do that kind of thing. Certainly our sponsors are Graphic Stock, so and I know that they've got a great selection and they are very reasonably priced. So it would be amiss of me to not mention Graphic Stock in amongst that. So definitely worth a look.
Excellent. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is being sponsored by Graphic Stock, who are currently running a competition with SitePoint, where you can win up to $5,000 for designing a themed movie poster. So definitely get in there. I will tweet more information about that. Our SitePoint Twitter account has been promoting the event for a little while, so if you follow SitePoint on Twitter, you'll find those links. Otherwise, definitely look for it. I'll be live tweeting it anyways. So, do we have any other questions? Yes, Cassandra has asked, what software storage or way to organize all of those thousands of photos?
I'm using Google Photos at the moment. It has facial recognition, and it's pretty clever. You can even type in things like, you know, ball or bar or denim and things like that, and it's pretty good at processing and looking at and recognizing objects in your photos, and it gets better and better over the years. It's amazing how clever it is. Plus, it's pretty cheap, even if you're paying for, I think it might be 5 or 10 gig that is the default, but to expand it to larger storage capacity, it's pretty cheap. I think it's something like $5 or $10 a year, so definitely worth working with.
Thank you for that, Alex. So some of you are asking if this video is going to be available afterwards. This will be available to replay. I will tweet a link to it as soon as it is out. If you have received any of our email promotions, we'll definitely be setting up another one with the link to this webinar so that you can access it. You can take notes if you have taken notes. If you haven't, that's okay, because you can just replay this video and grab all those notes again. Do we have any other questions before we sign out? Yes, we do. What photo equipment, Canon versus Nikon, would you recommend?
I'm a Nikon user myself, so but if you've got a really good camera, that's worth doing. But the problem with you know, having a great camera is, do you have it with you all the time? So what the quality of photography that you can get with a good camera phone these days is still well worth running with. So I almost, if you know you're going to take photos, yeah, great, bring your DSLR, but don't overlook a really good camera phone. You know, anything from an iPhone 5 on is going to give you quality photography, and it's just almost a matter of being aware of what you're looking at all the time. Sometimes there was a stage there where I'd get home and then think, oh no, wow, I just you know, had this amazing view, or I was camping and there was, you know, a great stream, and I forgot to photograph it, and I've got a little flag in the back of my head now that kind of picks up that where I'm somewhere where there's imagery that I might be able to take that will be useful at a later date. So that's almost a habit thing.
Okay. So another question has come in. How do you decide what you can Photoshop without getting into trouble?
I guess it's one of those things that if you have any doubt at all, it's usually pretty cheap to just find a pretty close image. I mean, it's so easy to sit there, and sometimes I'll sit there in you know, Google image search and just find something that's close, but for what it's worth, it's $10 or $20 often to register an image or to license an image. I've had a couple of things that have come back to bite me, and they were things where I actually did the right thing even, but if you get letters from lawyers, it's nasty. So it's just simpler most of the time to just pay a small amount of money and keep yourself out of trouble. If you're asking yourself the question, there's probably a pretty good chance that you've got a problem, or you may potentially have a problem. The thing is that most of the time, maybe every 50 things, 49 of them will be great. No one will care, but that 50th will give you a headache that will pursue you for months. So yeah, probably just do the right thing. You never know which one it's going to be that sort of bites you. The one that I had the biggest trouble with, where I had overseas solicitors writing letters to me, was one where I'd actually registered the image even through a site. So yeah, try to do the right thing.
Would you get in trouble if you took a picture similar to one that already exists?
Well, I guess Jeff Koons definitely made a sculpture of an image that already exists. So I guess with someone like Jeff Koons, he's a guy who's pretty famous, so the chances of the original artist seeing it are very high, and he's also got a lot of money, so maybe he might be different from us in that people won't be pursuing him. Well, people would be pursuing him more than they would with us because there's a lot to gain. So yeah, you could certainly get into trouble. The problem that we had was where we registered a rocket image for a book cover, and we paid for it through a well-known site, and it was a pretty generic-looking 50s style rocket, and we was probably about 12 months later got a letter from the Tintin people saying that that we'd infringed their copyright and that we had to pay them 5,000 euros or whatever it was, and it was a 3D model that someone else had made that they'd based on the Tintin red rocket. So it wasn't even Tintin or any of the major characters. It was a set piece really from 2 of the 24 Tintin original books. So that was certainly not the, I'm sure that I did things that were closer to the line than that over the years. But yeah, definitely, even when you do the right thing, you can sometimes have things bounce back on you.
Mm. So what is your say about those artists who sketch the photos or paint photos that belong to somebody else? Is that also considered illegal?
Yeah, I think if it's one of those things again. If you're starting to make significant money out of it, there's every extra dollar that you make out of an image that's based on someone else's image, the chances of them coming after you increase with every dollar. So and that's exactly what's happened with both Shepard Fairey and Jeff Koons. Obviously, they're famous, and there's good reasons to chase them. Probably more chances than people actually pursuing us. But that also means that the day that any of us get something right and something goes really well and we're in the habit of using things and not licensing them or not properly following the licensing conditions, you know that your success is going to be impinged upon by people that are coming to take their pound of flesh. So definitely keep that in mind if you've got something that looks like it's going to go well. Even at that stage, it might be worth trying to go back and register it retrospectively if you get into that situation. I'm not sure if that is going to stand up in court, but it'd probably still be worth trying. Although I think Art Fairy tried to change or manufacture some imagery that he said he based his Obama picture on, and then they discovered that that wasn't the case, and he got into even more trouble. So that is, yeah, definitely. You can get yourself into some big problems very quickly.
Okay. And if I did want to register an image, well, how can I do that? Where can I go? How can I crack into the market? Could you give me some tips about that?
Most of the time, the process of simply purchasing it through one of the stock sites, obviously part of signing up to that site and agreeing to their terms and conditions means that you have officially licensed that photo. Free use imagery and public domain imagery. One of the problems with that sometimes is that things that are officially licensed by other people can sometimes get uploaded to free use sites and public domain sites without actually being public domain. So there's not such a motivation for someone to check the imagery that's been labelled as free to use. So you can even get into problems with that if imagery is being uploaded that wasn't supposed to be and isn't licensed to be uploaded to those sites.
And so does that mean that for all the photographs that you take, you are the owner of your own photos, or is there something else to consider?
No, if you're the creator, if you've taken the photo, unless arguably if you have taken a close-up photo of the Mona Lisa, then your photograph isn't, you don't now own the rights to the to the image of the Mona Lisa or anyone else's artwork. So you get some shady areas where it might be a photograph of street art where someone else has created that art, or any situation where you're photographing someone else's work. There's your interpretation of their work, and there's their original work, and there's always going to be a grey area in there. So if you are standing in front of someone else's street art and you're photographed in front of that, that's a photograph of you in front of some art. So yeah, there are a lot of grey areas in this kind of stuff. So and I'm certainly not a lawyer, so I wouldn't want to be giving people too much advice on that stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine there are a lot of legal implications and bits that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering all those questions. By the way, for everybody out there watching this webinar, if you're not familiar with Alex Walker, he does release a weekly newsletter from SitePoint, a design newsletter. So if you like reading design, it's one of my favorite newsletters that I like to read as well, personally. I would highly recommend going to sitepoint.com/newsletters, and you can find a link to Alex's weekly newsletters if you'd like to subscribe to them. They're very, very insightful, always referencing something that had happened in the past and relating it to design. It's really, really intriguing. But yes, we are still open and available, so if you do have any more questions, please shoot them across right now. If not, then I'd say it's safe to say thank you for attending the webinar and being active on chat. It was fun talking to you all. Let me just wait a couple of minutes to see if any more questions pop through. Alex, would you like to say anything in the meantime?
No. Well, just thanks for attending, everyone. This is the first time we've used this software. So we're still working it out. It seems to be pretty good, but yeah, give us some feedback on the software. It's called Webinar Jam, and we'd probably like to use it a little bit more in the future, but we're still working out the bugs a little bit, and this is the kind of thing we'd like to do a little bit more of, but yeah, we're still working out some of the rough edges. So hopefully this wasn't too bad and that people enjoy it, and we can even polish up our game as we work forward in the future.
Excellent. Yes, please give us any feedback that you have on the software, on the webinar. If there's anything that we can do to improve the webinars, definitely let us know. We'd like to take that feedback on board and make it even better for you next time. We do have a few more webinars coming through, so keep your eyes peeled for them. One hosted by Graphic Stock and a couple more by a few more SitePoint contributors. So definitely make sure that you monitor our Twitter accounts to see what events are coming up, because this is the first webinar that we've hosted, and we're just going to present more and more of them. So as mentioned, you will have a link available if you've subscribed through email. Another email will be sent through with those links. Aside from that, we'll be tweeting the link to replay this video once it's available. Thank you all very much for attending and asking all your questions. They're all very interesting. Oh, I think one question has popped in quickly before we leave. Norm has asked, if I take a picture of a product, can the product owner state that I cannot use the picture on a website?
Ooh, well, I would think they can't. If you've actually purchased the product and you're photographed it, unless you're claiming, and again, here I am being Mr. Lawyer, so I hope this doesn't bounce back on me and I'm standing in a court at some point. But my I am not a lawyer view on that one is if you've purchased the product, you own the product and you are allowed to photograph it. If you are using the product shot as representing it in some kind of negative way, they might have some other way of some problem with you in a court environment. But if you are selling the product, presumably that's the only reason that you would, or promoting the product, I'm not sure why they would be not happy with you adding that image to your website. But yeah, that would be, I can't imagine that they would have any real case unless you were misrepresenting their product. So that's my best call on that particular question.
Do you have any tips for our users who are interested in participating in the competition? Are there any photo usage tips that you have, anything that they could use to help give them that winning edge in that competition?
Well, I think I said this in the newsletter that I'm not a judge in the competition, and I'm obviously not eligible to, although I wish I was. It seems like a fun competition, but probably if I was in the competition, I would take the view, I think there's two ways you can do it. You can take an 80s movie poster that already exists, or an 80s movie, and then try to do a new version of that. To me, that seems like a hard ask. If you're trying to out-design the guy who designed the Footloose poster or the Raiders of the Lost Ark poster and do a better version of that, that seems like a hard ask to me. But to take a new movie, I've seen a few people that have done Interstellar and Inception and things like that, and then take that back and then reinterpret it in the 80s. Someone did a great poster of Her, the movie, with like a VIC-20 or a Commodore 64 as the central image, and I thought that was super clever. So yeah, I would probably, from my own personal point of view, take the view that backdating a new movie with an 80s style is probably the smart move, because it just gives you more, it gives you a bit of an in-joke to play with, and it gives you more room to do the best one of those ever, whereas you're probably not going to do a better Footloose poster than the original Footloose poster, for example. So yeah, that would probably be my major piece of advice.
And oh, go on, sorry. And lucky last question was, Vimal asked if you have Google search images in your own blog site, can you use it? Like, what about using Google search images in your own blog site? Can you do that?
Well, if you go to the panel at the bottom when you do a search on Google Images, there is a section that says usage, I think it's usage rights, that sorts Google Images by their licensing agreement, but that is only generated by a bot that goes through and tries to determine, it's a Google bot that tries to determine whether something is you know, free or licensed or whatever. So like all bots make mistakes all the time. You know, they you know, get lots of things wrong on when you're searching for things. You don't always get the right thing. So I would say no. You know, that Google image search is probably just good for getting an idea of images in a particular area, or if you want to understand what a Holden Commodore looks like, or a particular car, then that's great. But reposting that stuff, the chances of you getting caught doing it on a blog are not super high. But then again, the technology for linking and you know, finding images online is getting better and better. You can search for visually similar images through Google and another service called TinEye. So even if you think you're getting away with it now and that no one will care, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, there are, you know, services that are crawling all over your website, finding stuff, and going back to the owner and tapping them on the shoulder and saying, "I can make you some money," you know, that kind of stuff. Maybe it's not a problem today, but you know, who knows what's going to happen in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years. So none of us want to be tucking these problems into a back drawer and having them jump out on us later on. So yeah, I would say be very careful with Google image search and using the images you're finding in there.
Excellent. And I think it's about time to wrap up. So thank you once again. I've said thank you so many times, but that's it. I think we can start taking questions. Thanks for the presentation once again. And like mentioned before, this video will be available afterwards, and I will be tweeting that link as soon as it becomes available. I hope you didn't take too many notes, because you can always replay this later. But I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and thank you, Alex, for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.